Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Kimble, and today I'm going to talk about the Southwest Airlines crisis that occurred in December of 2022 with Winter Storm Elliott. Now, the airline industry is no stranger to crisis and conflict. However, this was a bit of a different one for Southwest Airlines, which was typically enjoyed a pretty strong reputation among its external customers and stakeholders. However, after this debacle, Southwest was left with not only angry external customers, but also frustrated staff, concerned stakeholders, and even in federal investigation. So let's get started and we'll talk about this crisis. So an overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you a basic summary of what happened during this incident. What were the facts that occurred and emerged during the situation? We're going to discuss some communication analysis about what leaderships did well and what they did poorly. And then finally, we're going to end with some recommendations on how they could have handled this crisis better and how they can build towards a better future so they don't stumble into the same kind of communication traps as they had in this incident. This incident began in December of 2022 with Winter Storm Elliott. On the 21st of December, it began unleashing extreme low temperatures, precipitation, damaging winds, and widespread power impacts across the United States. This was really the storm of a century. Over the course of 10 days, Southwest ended up canceling 16,000 flights, which was significantly higher than its partners in the airline industry and other organizations that restricted travel. Their initial messaging in the first few phases of the storm really blamed the weather, talking about how the weather was creating operational impacts, how they were concerned for the safety of travelers and staff, and that's why they were canceling flights. This led to a lot of challenges with things like baggage handling, where people were separated from their luggage when their flights were canceled, and there were just thousands of people stranded in airports around the country over the holiday season, which led to an even higher emotional toll and challenge surrounding this incident. But after the first few messages where Southwest was blaming the weather, employees started to speak up and say, no, we've been telling our leadership about our scheduling technology challenges for years, and this is a problem that has been in the making for a long time and is finally coming to a head. One pilot actually went out online on his social media platform and detailed the challenges that had been expressed by multiple employees and the overarching issue of change in leadership from the initial founding CEO, Herb Kelleher, to the subsequent CEO who really destroyed communication with employees and staff and stakeholders, to the current administration, who he said had been doing a better job, but just was going to need several years to right the ship. And so amidst this communication crisis with stakeholders, we start to see a different perspective coming from our internal audience. And that became a headline in and of itself. The estimated losses for this 10-day incident that Southwest dealt with ranged between $725 million and $825 million in lost revenue and consumer apologies that they had provided in terms of products and services. Next, we're going to do some communication analysis and start to dive into why this house of cards crumbled the way that it did. Feng et al. Talk about the institutional preconditions for effective corporate crisis communication. The top one, and I see this in a lot of crises, is that organizations need to remain accessible by engaging news media and social media audiences alike, staying in touch and in the conversation. They need to be responsive and they need to address the global public. There are a lot of people impacted, especially in crises of this magnitude, like the one that Southwest Airlines dealt with. Not only was it grounding flights in the domestic US, it had farther reaching impacts for staff and families and patrons who may have been from other countries, and it was affecting the airline industry as a whole. Another element of that effective corporate crisis communication is informing and updating stakeholders about why the crisis is happening, what factors have contributed, and then using terminology with care to avoid misunderstanding, or in this case, maybe even to avoid being misleading. Southwest had several missteps in this case, and one of them was that their communication was only shared on their website as far as what was going on, the cause of the crisis, and status updates. Southwest actually has a very robust social media presence, and so it was surprising that they did not utilize this space to engage in more two-way and responsive conversation with their stakeholders. Further, their lack of interactive resources reduced responsiveness. They were directing people to go online or to use the app to get updates on their flights and to figure out the status of their baggage. And in a case like this where emotions were running high and there was a lot of challenges, Southwest may have benefited from staffing up their call center so that people could actually speak with a real human and discuss the challenge. Further, mixed messaging around the cause of this crisis and the misleading wording created further reputational risk when the employees came out and said, no, this problem may have started with the storm, but it was really exacerbated by the technology issues and the leadership issues we've experienced over the last several years. When evaluating Southwest challenges that they faced in communication, we can also look to the situational crisis communication theory to see where things went wrong. This theory identifies 3 clusters, victim, accidental, and intentional, that demonstrate what level of control an organization really had in a crisis, and therefore how much they are to blame in the public or stakeholders' eyes. Based on the cluster that someone falls into, organizations can consider different strategies: deny, diminish, or rebuild. In this case, Southwest pointed to the weather as the reason for the complete meltdown of their scheduling system. And in that case, they would have been the victim if it was fully due to the weather. And so they could have used deny strategies in terms of their culpability. However, as employees started to speak out and say, no, this problem has been building for a long time, it became clear that Southwest actually fell more into the accidental cluster, where sure, they could not control the weather. However, their scheduling issues, the technical glitches that caused, while not caused by any malintent, were certainly a little bit more within their control. And so therefore, switching to a diminished strategy or using that initially would have been more effective. Switching between those clusters mid-crisis is a challenge and can create further reputational risk. And so that's something that Southwest is having to still deal with. Now that we know what exactly happened during this incident and we have some insight into why the communication strategies failed, we're going to discuss recommendations in terms of improving existing communication around that particular incident and ways that Southwest can improve in the future. One of those is streamlining internal information flow to avoid potential conflicts like we discussed in the last slide. One of the ways we can do this is focusing on building communication synergy. Some of the strategies around doing that within an organization include giving communication professionals a seat at the executive table, diversifying their roles so that they can leverage their expertise and advise their peers on the best way to manage a crisis, and then positioning communication professionals in different consulting roles so they can help others within the organization improve their own communication skills. And then finally, embedding those communication and PR professionals within crisis management teams. I wonder with Southwest where the communicators were positioned and how that messaging strategy developed. Was it a case of people thinking that they could just get away with blaming the weather and didn't anticipate the employee issues? Or was it that the communicators who were drafting those messages were just simply receiving instructions from leaders and crisis managers within the organization? Whatever the case may be, integrating your communications professionals throughout the organization can help so that they anticipate some of the challenges that may arise and can come up in partnership with some of the more authentic and effective messaging throughout all stages of a crisis. And finally, I would advise Southwest to minimize reputational damage by staying involved in the conversation. By leaving the online space and not engaging internally with their employees, they lost an opportunity to help manage this crisis and instead created a secondary crisis that they now are still dealing with. Further, when something happens around an emotional time, like the holidays, incorporating adjusting information as well as the instructing information can help people navigate the challenge and stay connected with Southwest and minimize that reputational damage. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today to this brief overview of the Southwest Airlines winter crisis. I wish you the best in the rest of your courses. Thank you.